Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second annual podcast where today we'll be talking about mental health. My name is Command Sergeant Major retired Freddie Brock, and I'm the Vice President of NCO and Soldier Programs for the Mid-Missouri, Fort Leonard Wood, Mid-Missouri AUSA chapter. We host this podcast at this time of year because right now, the holiday season is the hardest to manage. So our guest is here to share her story and hope that you find common grounds and seek help if you need it. We're also here with Jennifer Brock and Major Lamb, two of our mental health providers who could talk more about local resources. I'm quite humbled to be a moderator with our guest, a legend, and I'm a true legend in the military police regiment. Sergeant First Class, retired Chelsea Porterfield. Chelsea recently retired from the Army with her last assignment, serving as a Sergeant of the Guard in 3rd U.S. Army Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, to an unknown soldier. During her career, she's deployed twice to Iraq, once to Afghanistan, and once to Israel, with overseas assignments in Hawaii, Korea, and Germany. She's carried many titles during her career, but her two most impactful are mom to her son Hunter, and she is the wife to Sergeant First Class retired Tug Porterfield. Chelsea, thank you again for your bravery and willingness to talk to us. Her story begins during the holiday period where we find ourselves today. Good morning, Chelsea. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Freddie, for having me. Thank you, guys. Chelsea Porterfield officially became a citizen as a July or retiree. I don't have my retiree hat yet, but I will eventually. 20 years of service. I've done more than some Snickers and less than others. Just a standard of-the-mill career. Sorry, guys. We have dogs also. Snickers. I hope that my story resonates with some people or anybody who's listening, just because there is a stigma out there, and sometimes that stigma can be self-imposed and sometimes it can be imposed upon us. So with that, my story really begins leading up to the holiday season. The holiday season itself, November 28th is whenever I ended up asking for help by way of inpatient. But going back to what led up to it and knowing when to ask for help, I didn't know when or what the right answer was to ask for help. I just knew that sometimes I wasn't okay. Sometimes I had my internal monologue that just told me to suck it up and drive on, or dismiss whatever thoughts I had roaming around in my head and shake it off, and tomorrow will be a new day. And it's important to understand that there's thoughts and then there's intent. And I didn't understand that at the time. So a few days leading up into November 28th, my safe space was work. That is what I used to show my representative. That is where I thrived as a person who I identified with as a soldier. And leading up to that, and nothing was good enough. I wasn't good enough for anything. I wasn't worthy enough to be a wife. I wasn't worthy enough to be a mom. I'm not good enough to be a leader. And that's really where my inner monologue was feeding itself. And I had been going down this long-term rabbit hole of feeding this to myself. And a few days going into post-Thanksgiving, I'm rocking my son to sleep, and his favorite song was, or still is, I guess you can say, is the alphabet, ABCs. So we would sing the ABCs to him when he would go to sleep or take a nap. And every time I arrived to the letter G, I had uncontrollable thoughts of plans for guns. And as you can imagine, that's pretty scary as a person. But sometimes you just shake it off. I shook it off, dismissed it. And over the course of a few days, my thoughts and my intent became a lot stronger to the point where it scared me. So that morning, November 28th, I had made a very staunch decision that I was going to make this plan. This plan was going to be enacted. And I go to work. And I ended up having a panic attack. I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was a panic attack. And I drove to behavioral health on Fort Myer, and they were closed for training. And I didn't really know what to do at that point. At that point, I realized, I was like, okay, this is a sign, and this sign says it's meant to be, right? This codifies that I'm not worthy enough. It's just reinforcing my idea that I no longer need to be here, and people will be better without me in their life and in their just creating issues. My husband called me on that morning. I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot. He kept calling. And I kept declining it. So I'm not going to answer this. And I ended up answering. And I'm crying. And he says, go to Fort Belvoir to the emergency room. I told him what I was thinking. I told him my plan. And that's really where I understood that I'm not okay, and I can't talk about it. I can't say it out loud, because if I say it out loud, then it's going to be true. And then that means that I'm weak. Then that means that I told you so is going to happen. Then that means I'm going to hear all of this. So I made the choice to drive to Fort Belvoir, and I walked into the emergency room with a note, because I was still crying. I mean, it was ugly cry, snot cry, the gross cry that you don't show anyone. That's the cry that I walked into the emergency room with. And I handed the intake nurse this note, and she knew exactly what to do. I still couldn't say it out loud, because then that means it's true. Then that means I'm feeding a narrative that I imposed on myself. And from that point forward, I walked into the inpatient with a little bit of guilt and shame, and I started taking personal accountability from that point forward. Once I started getting stabilized and going through and having real hard conversations about hurt and anger and pain and depression and work and addiction to work, and transparency about, this is what I'm thinking, these ugly words, these dark days, this is what I'm thinking. It wasn't until I said it out loud and I gave it a name and I gave it some truth, and I said it over and over and over, and I just took personal accountability. And that is my knowing when to ask for help. I knew something was wrong. I knew I didn't want to die, but I knew that I couldn't be here. I couldn't be here anymore, but I didn't want to die. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. It's not like you could just disappear and everything would be okay. Sometimes you have to sit with it until the hurt goes away. And, really through this process of the holidays and after I came out of inpatient, we still had Christmas and we still had, a 2-year-old that we were trying to have Christmas for. My husband was trying to process everything that was going on. It was very transformational at the time. It was very stressful. And the holidays kind of add to it because it's supposed to be joyous. It's supposed to be happy. It's supposed to be loving. But there's a lot of life stressors that go into the holidays that I don't think people readily talk about. And it wasn't until we both collectively came together through the situation that we started actually having honest conversations about the ugly and the hard and just being able to live through this dark times and just talk about it. Just talk about it. Anybody who's going through, if you're going through it right now and you're trying to muffle or mute whatever inner voice you have going on, trauma comparing, imposter syndrome, anything that's telling you something just isn't right, bring it up, write it down, say it out loud. And if it's your spouse you can't talk to about it because of a bias, or if you're harboring a bunch of guilt and shame from some situation or something that has happened throughout your military career, you're doing it to yourself. Anger is a gift you're doing to your own self because of somebody else. But it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad, as long as you write it down, read it out loud, talk about it with somebody. You have to get the ugly out, and you got to sit with the ugly. You got to sit with the hurt until it doesn't hurt anymore. You've got to watch your scary movie over and over till it's not scary to you anymore. Because my story isn't any different than someone else's story. The difference is that I'm using my story to hopefully help people, or hopefully those other people that have the same story just on a different spectrum also talk about it this holiday season and explain to others that, you're not alone. You're not alone, but I'm not going to trauma compare. I'll sit with you. I'll sit with you in the dark if you don't want to come into the light yet, and we'll talk through this. And I just think that's really important through the holiday seasons. The holiday seasons can be lonely and they can be full of stressors. Even if you do have a good support system, or if outside looking in, if people say, oh, you have everything, you're so squared away, or you're the go-to person, or you're this or you're that, not everything is glitter and gold on the other side. Sometimes the real ugly is behind the representative, and I challenge some people to take that representative down. It's not healthy. Until you figure out you need to just sit with the hurt with it for a little bit, and until it doesn't hurt anymore. But reach out to somebody. And then if you're one that has gone through it successfully, you know what to look for. You know what behaviors change. And just start identifying that in people that once used to be a certain way or act a certain way, and you notice just a little bit of change in their vibes or their physiological responses to things, and make sure that you check on them, because 9 times out of 10 they're probably hiding some dark thoughts that they don't want to give truth to. That is short my story without getting too deep into it with the triggering, I hope that it didn't trigger anybody talking about a plan or talking about, as a mom or a wife or a leader, nothing was ever good enough. I'm sure that even as a husband or a single dad, I hope somebody heard it.
Yeah. But thank you, Chelsea. That's a powerful story, and I appreciate you telling us that. I like to bring in two of our behavioral health counselors who volunteered to be with us today, so we could further expand on your story. Um, One is Jennifer Brock. She's a behavioral health provider, and she's here today as a volunteer. She's also connected to the military. She's at one time had three children. One's deployed to Iraq twice, and the two girls were overseas during the holiday period.
We still have the three children.
We still have the three children, yes. As a disclaimer, she is my wife, and probably myself had a lot to do with front loading stress through the holiday periods, but I will turn it over to her so she can talk to you, Chelsea.
Chelsea, it's so awesome to be here with you, and I wish you were here with us in this room, but I'm so glad to be on this platform with you. It's hard to hear your story and not be moved by that, right? So
Chelsea, Miss Brock and I actually teared up as you were talking.
we were just kind of getting choked up as you talked, because we hear this every day in the work that we do with our patients. And I learned so much. I've listened to several of your podcasts before. I've spent some time talking to you. I hear a lot about people who struggle, especially this time of year, with work-life balance. And I wonder if you could, in talking with you, you challenge that theory, and you look at it as it doesn't exist. And so I wonder if you could just talk to us about that balance that we're all striving for during this time of year and throughout the year.
Absolutely. I used to think, I used to believe the justice scales of balance was real. And I fought really hard for a really long time to make them equal at all times. I was constantly trying to make sure that I was balanced, my son was balanced, my husband was balanced, work was balanced. And I found that it's impossible. And this is just my opinion, there's no, and this is what I've seen with some of my soldiers and the later on in my career, there's just no such thing as a balance. It's either going to be too much or too less. Some days you're killing it as a mom and, you're failing as a leader. Some days you're crushing it as a wife. And you're really failing in your, as a mom. And that goes for dads too. This isn't gender specific. If you're a single father out there, with some dad guilt, some days you might be crushing it as a leader or falling short as a parent. It's not real in my mind. It was never successful for me. The only thing that I was able to bring to the table and make successful was integration. And something I told my last assignment, balance is fake. Integration is real. If you don't have the family, you don't have the soldier. So the only important way you can do that is integrate them into the mission so they have a true sense of ownership in their soldiers' mission accomplishment. And specifically at the tomb, we spent almost 11 months completely isolated from a lot of things, and they were segregated by squad, and the hours that they put in down there are a lot. It's more than anybody would ever want to ask for, and they do it willingly. But the only way to get support so I could have my tomb guards or my soldiers at full capacity was to make sure that their fiancés, their boyfriends, their girlfriends, their spouses actually were a part of the mission, and they got to see what their soldiers were doing, and how important it was for the accomplishment of our little piece of the pie. And same with their children. And I think it's important that even more so the children get to see it. My son used to call it mommy's daycare when he was younger. So I would always say, we're going to go to mommy's daycare after I would pick him up from his daycare, and he would come in and they would go, and he would see mommy's friends from daycare. And that's how, same with my soldiers and their spouses. Hey, bring them to the table. I need them to see what you're going through so they can actually have a part of this. This is important what you're doing. This is important work. Doesn't matter whatever mission you have. But I was very thankful for the command support that I had during that time, or just even during the integration piece, to allow me to make sure I assumed the appropriate risk to bring the integrated piece. It just created a more buy-in, a more wholesome, inclusive platoon. So that's my little piece of, I don't think balance is real. Balance is not real. Integration is what is important and is what makes it true.
I love that. I love that so much. I want to ask, in a previous podcast of yours that I listened to, you said one of the first things that you did when you were discharged from the hospital was to meet with your soldiers and to let them know what happened. Can you talk about why you did that, or what the importance was, and maybe what the reaction was?
I did. I asked my commander at inpatient, whenever they release you, I said, "Sir, I need to, it's really important. Can I talk to, the leaders and also my soldiers? I need to explain what's going on." Because I understand that we have HIPAA, we have this, we have the private stuff, but at the same time, there's always going to be an elephant in the room. And I wanted to make sure I addressed it up front. And I did not want to be treated any differently. I didn't want people to walk on eggshells. I didn't want people to change how they approached me or I approached them in some sort of fragile way, because I wasn't fragile. I had just been in a situation where I was being stabilized. I understood it at the time. I had a lot of tears. I told them what happened, what I was thinking. And then I said, basically, I'm the same Sergeant Porterfield. Right now, I can't carry a weapon, and I can't support you in the mission. But what I can do is still guide you and mentor you when you need me. I may be a little more open, and I may need you guys, sometimes. So there might be a day where I'm like, I'm struggling, and I may need to tell you I'm struggling. Just so they understood whatever was going on. But I'm the same person, and I will eventually get back, and I will be out there, and I will support your mission in the same capacity I did before. I just can't right now, but I will get better. That was the whole concept, that I'm not being separated. I'm not taking a med board. The elephant in the room is addressed. We don't have to whisper about it. You can talk to it to my face. don't talk to it about it behind my back. And I just made sure that I did it across the board too, with all of my peers that were infantry, just because I'm a senior female in an infantry battalion, and that was part of one of my concerns, was the "I told you so" factor, or that. And luckily, it didn't happen. And they were very, very, very supportive, 100%.
That's awesome. Stigma is certainly one of the things that we know people don't seek behavioral health care because of the stigma that's associated there. I just have one more question. As providers, you've worked with different providers in your career. What advice or what wisdom can you share with us as providers who will be working with our active duty service members, veterans, and families?
So I found that I've seen a few. I found that whenever the providers that I speak with, every single one has always been supportive, but my favorite is candid conversations. If soldiers are a very unique breed of group, majority of us are so alpha, or the warrior leader that we have instilled in us, pacification or passive aggressive talk, whatever you want to call it, just doesn't really work. It has to be direct and point. And sometimes hearing what you don't want to hear is going to be the best thing for you. And that's what works for me. I need, no, this is what it is, and that's what you have to do, or this is what I think you should do. And then maybe I had one provider. I hated group when I first started. Group session was not a thing, not a big fan. I didn't want to sit in a circle and talk about feelings. But that was my an image of what group was. And she said, no, you're going to group and you're going to go talk. I don't care how you talk about it, but you're going to go. And luckily, going to a group therapy for the first few times, I didn't have to talk. I just listened the first couple of days. And then I realized I am not alone. I'm not alone. Some of the situations they go through weren't exactly like mine, but I have been in those situations. And I'm like, I like how they handled this situation. And then I started becoming more comfortable and discussing life situations that eroded the resiliency and the foundation of ultimately leading to me to go seek help. But candid, blunt conversations is what worked best for me, and I think that's what helps from a provider.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chelsea. Our other guest today with behavioral health background is Major Locke Lamb. He's a psychiatric nurse practitioner. That's his background. He's here today to volunteer also, but we thought we needed kind of both of them to tell their story after they're hearing your story. But Major Lamb?
Hey, thank you very much. Hey, Chelsea, nice seeing you again.
Nice to see you, sir.
As I was listening to your story, there was a roller coaster of emotions that just went up and down, and I couldn't modulate it. But at the same time, and certainly more importantly, I know you have a really sweet gig as your retirement job, but the psych world can certainly use people like you, should you want it.
Oh man, so much school.
It is several years. Hey, I got two questions for you. In one of your previous talk, you mentioned if apathy has changed to apathy, and if your compassion has changed to comparison, Would you mind expanding on that concept?
Yes. So now I didn't get this at the time, right? This is some of these things after going through, and this is 4 years later, and I still work on myself. I still follow a few neuroscientists and behavioral health scientists where I do a lot of research with me and my husband both on just cognitive therapy or just understanding what happens and why it happens. In hindsight 2020, looking back on what's leading up, right? Or whenever you know your cap is, empathy turning to apathy. I'm naturally an empathetic person. And what I noticed is that whenever my stress plate becomes so big that my bevel is soon to break. When soldiers come to me, or when situations arise, or when people come to me, I started approaching these situations very apathetic, no longer empathetic, and no longer patient enough to sit down and actually dissect what's happening, or even worse, no longer patient enough to give them my time so we can dissect what's happening. And I'm now apathetic to what is going on. I'm no longer compassionate and understanding because I can empathize with the situation. I'm now apathetic, and I'm comparing their situation to what I've made it through. And that's when you need to step back and realize this is no longer, this is harmful to you as a person, and it's harmful to them. It does no good to detach and be apathetic of the situation. And I understand people have I understand empathy is a hard thing to come by if you have no experience in the situation, but you can still be empathetic and compassionate to a dimensional spectrum. It doesn't have to be exact, but you can dig deep down and find a situation where you can find an emotion that can connect. So that's when I know my personal stress is capping, when I start being apathetic, and then I'm now comparing their situation to something I personally have already made it through, and I am no longer trying to assist them. I'm now trying to dismiss them. And that's the cons. That's where I didn't even come to that conclusion until probably during transition, during these last 11 months of just self-discovery and recalibration. I was like, man, I could have probably worked on myself a lot more earlier on in my career, and I've been a better leader, or even, a better mom, a better wife. But, right now is never too late. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So we call that insight and hitting the point of self-actualization. And so working with patients on a day in, day out basis, certainly with Ms. Brock here, one of the best things that we can do for our clients in front of us is how do we improve their insight to connect their thought process to their behaviors? Certainly, more concerningly as well, the maladaptive behaviors. And so certainly it sounds like you got there. So I congratulate you for that. I mean, it's a very challenging process to reach.
Yeah.
And so my second question pertains to community resources, which is, in your experience, what has worked for you, and how can we as leaders improve the community process and resources to better deliver it to the service members?
Perfect. Community resources. So I think I know that the behavioral health community is extremely strained. We'll say strained, overworked, backlogged, whatever word you want to throw in there. And it's not because people are just now coming to ask for help, right? It's because there is a huge array of spectrums of problems. There's life circumstances, and then there's life and death circumstances. So life circumstances, which may seem like a very catastrophic situation if you're faced with it at first, financial burdens, a newborn baby, which I'm helping my sister out right now with theirs here in Dallas, so integrating a 2-year-old with an infant and trying to make sure he understands he's not being replaced and stuff like that. So there's life situations that can seem like it is the end of the world. And then there's life and death situations. And life and death situations are compounded life situations that are unaddressed, that feed the sense of anger, guilt, shame, trauma, unaddressed everything. And that is when you have if you look at a foundation of a house, that's when you have the black mold and the crack in the concrete. That's because of life situations are just compounding and they haven't been addressed head on. And when it comes to community resources, MFLAC. MFLAC is a good one for life circumstances. Life circumstances, not life or death circumstances, life circumstances. The chaplain, I was very close to a lot of our chaplains. I made it a point. I'm not a very religious person, but I am a belief person. So I made it a point to just become friends with all of my chaplains. So I can tell them, hey, this was going on in my life. If we're in the smoking area, I am a smoker. So that's usually where I get some of my best conversations at. Or you have post-transition, you also have the Veteran Solid Start program. That program is absolutely amazing. They, can refer you to any sort of grief counseling. It's free mental health. It's a really good program. Even VFW, your state VFW, VSO, your Veterans Support Organization, and your individual state representative. Just recently, I had a soldier who his brother committed suicide. He is one of 8 brothers, and he has lost 5 of them to suicide over the course of years. And he called the state VSO, and they got him a grief counselor the very next day. Now is he high risk? Yes. Do I believe that he's going to be, probably not. He's a very resilient person, but a lot of the local, not everything requires a psychiatrist or a therapist. I just know that I had people in my command that were not in my chain of command that I went and I sat on their couch and I just had my 4-letter word conversations with. And I would tell them this all the way through A, or I would come home or I would text my husband and be like, hey, remind me to tell you about this, because after bedtime, I'm about to blow up and we're going to do this. Not even, it could be, it doesn't have to be your spouse either, but I would recommend MFLAC, your chaplains in the local VFW is great. And so is the American Legion. They have also some really good support organization, even support personnel for life situations. Life and death situations are something completely different, but you have to understand intent versus non-intent. If you're actively making a plan, that's intent. If you're thinking step by step on how to make a clean break, that is intent.
Mhm.
And you need to articulate it.
Wow.
I'm sorry. Was that
No, I'm almost mesmerized by your responses as I'm sitting here. In my training, in my experience, I've had very good presenters who are well known within the psychiatry realm, but certainly you're up there in terms of the impact in which the way you present, not necessarily just what you say, but how you say it. So totally appreciate you for that.
Thank you,
Totally
sir.
appreciate you for that.
And I love how you said you don't, it doesn't have to be psychiatry. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be a fancy degree on the wall. We're all capable of reaching out to a friend, like you said, when you notice the change in behavior, maybe something you've been through before, being able to check on people. You don't need a degree for that.
So piggyback on the community resources, there's 2 slides in which I'd like to go over, which echoes a lot of what you talked about today, Chelsea. And so slide, please. Here you see 4 line items. The bluff is that more than half the service member with mental health concerns do not get help. And of those who do, less than half follow through with care. And the reasons of why this happens is what you see in front of you. Chelsea talked about stigma. We talked about stigma in terms of I would be seen as weak. It would harm my career, so on and so forth. Chelsea also talked about organizational barrier, that the mission and her troops takes precedence over her care at the cost of sometimes her family's well-being. And then on the 3rd line item, for self-sufficiencies, Chelsea talks about an idea in which she calls it high functioning in some of her previous talks. But the way that we see high functioning depression is synonymous to consider something more common, which is high functioning alcoholics, right? There's always that problem, but in front of people at work, in front of your bosses, we have this great facade that we put on, only to essentially crack down once we take that uniform off. And then for the last point, Sergeant Major Brock served more than 27 years, but from my understanding, he didn't seek help until his 27-point-something year mark.
Mhm.
And he said that one of the first questions that he had for his therapist was, how are you going to help me? He said that his therapist has never experienced combat trauma and certainly did not ever wear the uniform. So how would she know that what he was going through? And so that's a very valid question that a lot of our service members, specifically our senior NCOs and our senior officers, would come in and say, how do you know what I'm going through? Whether it's with me, whether it's with Brock or any of our colleagues, right? And so slide, please. And so the slide here on the top, on the right-hand side and the bottom side accounts for about 45%. And having your trust is 45% of the battle. For me specifically, I do this by helping specifically one symptom, which is typically sleep. If I can help you with your sleep, it shows that something works. And from there, the rest of the technique, the rest of the modalities becomes much easier, relatively speaking. But at the same time, what I usually tell my teammates is that we meet patients 60% of the way, but they have to want to go and do the other 40% of the work. And then slide, please. And then one last point for me is that I'm referencing the picture on the right side. You know, this is certainly tailored to all the more senior NCOs and senior officers, but to include your families and the junior NCOs and junior officers too. But hey, you took care of us, you coached us, and you mentored us throughout all these years. And some of us stuck it through and we made it, right? The plea and the ask to you is that you allow us to let us take care of you back. And so, Sergeant Major, that ends my portion.
Thank you, sir.
Sergeant Major Brock, we have a question from the audience. It says, if you're approached or have a person in your life going through rough waters even when it's a life event versus a life or death.
Mm.
How do you help them in the moment understand or articulate the difference? For any panel member to answer.
Hey, Chelsea, you included, if you want to answer the question.
Yeah,
So chime in.
I think that if this was in this, how to help them articulate the difference, life versus life, I wouldn't compare either one. I wouldn't say either one to them. I would simply first listen, because genuinely that's probably what they're asking for at this point, is to just someone hear me what's here, listen to what I have to say, because someone's not listening in their sphere of bubble. So listen. Once you listen and truly listen and extract data, right, extract the truth or what they're really talking about, at that point you can either, one, be blunt and say, did you make a plan? Do you have a plan? If it is life or death. Or if the baseline of the conversation, a life event, is actually a financial burden, or it's actually a marital situation, or it's actually, something at work, or a climate issue, or a culture within the organization that is now leading to not wanting to go to work. I don't want to be here. I just can't do this. That's not necessary. That's not a life or death situation. It harbors down to something more. It could lead to that, yes. But first finding out, fact finding, and the only way to do that is to actively intent and listen. Because you could boil it down to something that's really up here and hasn't reached the foundation yet. But the important thing is, if it has reached the foundation, like, do you have a plan? And if they say yes, then that's where I would say, okay, well, this is what I think we should do. And I'll be there with you.
Okay.
Oh, can I just add something to that? In talking with you, Chelsea, you said it's not necessarily for you. It wasn't like a big, well, prior to you going inpatient, it wasn't necessarily a big thing. It was all these little things, right, that just kind of came together and became the big thing. So
For a long time, yes.
Right.
Not addressing. It's what I called robot mode. I was in like robot mode for a really long time, and I ran out of water. I was just trying to make everybody happy for a long time, and nobody was happy, right? At the end of it, all of these things, nobody was happy, but it really wasn't me. It was everybody else. But I no longer am happy. Now I'm self-depleted,
Right.
and I don't no longer want to live, because I don't think I deserve to live, because I'm not making anybody happy.
Hey, Chelsea, to piggyback onto your response to the question earlier, what I would do is I'll annotate your quote to the Facebook response, in which you said, sometimes you just have to sit with it until the hurt goes away. And so I thought that was relatively profound in terms of presence. Regardless of whatever the situation is, if you can go through the situation with somebody, we'll figure out the rest later. We just got to get through that hump.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's like, I was just talking to a previous leader just recently about training at the tomb, because it's long, intense, and you fail every day, 2 or 3 times a day. And some of the most impactful hours are 2 a.m. Behind the rails and chains and rails. But that is where you really start, analyzing and coming true to yourself. That's when you're like, okay, I need to step back and realize this is 100% me a thing, and I'm going to hold myself accountable, or You could be like me where you find yourself sitting on the steps of the Memorial Amphitheater listening to a life situation, you know.
Chelsea, and I think all of us are glad you chose to live, to be able to share this with everybody, and hopefully, we've helped somebody. As we prepare to close, I hope someone that was listening today benefits from what Chelsea shared with us. And if you're listening and you need help, call the Nationwide Mental Health Crisis Line at 988, or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-TALK. And then if you're struggling, call a friend. Whatever you do, don't struggle alone. Got to throw a couple of disclaimers out there too. Hey, this was not an official DOD event. This is something that we thought in collaboration with Chelsea and Jennifer and Loch Lamb that this could benefit somebody during the holiday. I know you benefited Jennifer, so I saw she had to wipe a couple tears away. And then I like to think you heard him in the background, but our webmaster is Sergeant Major retired.
Our producer.
Our producer.
Yeah.
Sergeant Major retired Breckenridge. And then we're in the Align Mortgage. I call it the green room. But all these people came together and made, I think, this a successful event. I mean, hearing your story and talking with you is, I like the candor. So it's quite unique. But I'll have you have the closing word, Chelsea.
I don't know. I think just I don't even know. Talk about it. Talk about it with anybody.
Absolutely.
Give it the truth. Even if it's just life being hard. Communication's the only way to make it easier.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you and your family and everybody's family has a blessed holiday season.
Thank you.
Make sure you wear your jacket when you come back to Missouri this weekend.
Ooh, I heard.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Happy holidays.
Bye.